Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donna Fiesel, and I'm your host of Donna's Edge Talk Show, where truth matters. Thank you so much for watching. Monday through Friday, beginning at 2 p.m., and that's on the Eastern Time Zone, so I get to ride home with you in the afternoon. You can find us syndicated on television. That's Abundant Television, found on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. And don't forget the podcast on thenewscasters.com. And you'll be able to find us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, known as X now. Made the jump into a MeWe and just a whole bunch of them. So, and YouTube too. So if you're afraid you're going to get in trouble at work, I don't want you in trouble at work. Don't watch while you're in. You can watch anytime you want to on any of those social media sites. But again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for sending emails. It makes my day. Donna@donnasedge.com. That's Donna@donnasedge.com. I have one of our regulars with us right now, Pastor Mark Sowersby. Good to be with you, Mark.
It's always a blessing to be with you, Donna. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my testimony and lift up the name of the Lord. Thank you.
Oh, always. So a lot of fascinating things are happening with you. You're an author and you're a speaker, movie going on. Just you're a busy guy.
It sounds really, really important, but it's just putting our hands to the plow and being about the Lord's business and letting the Lord lead us into writing books. And part of our book, Forgive the Nightmare, has been turned into the short film, and being able to go out and speak about this testimony. Really, it seems really glamorous, but it's just one step saying, Lord, lead us and guide us.
You know something, when you're helping folks with what you have written, when you're helping folks with that book, it doesn't have to be glamorous. It's to the point, and you've helped a lot of folks with that book.
Well, we're honored to be able to share the testimony. And if people find hope in the testimony, find the Lord in the testimony, find grace in our testimony of overcoming trauma and pain, I'm glad to go and share and speak no matter where it is. This last week, I was in Pennsylvania. A few weeks before that, I was in Seattle, Washington. And we're just excited. We're headed out to New York City next week and Virginia. So it's an exciting time to go out and speak about the testimony, as it says in the book of Revelations, chapter 12, verse 11, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I just want to share that because I know how broken I was, how trapped I was by fear and insecurity because of the trauma and the abuse I went through. And then Christ became my Lord and Savior and set me free.
We were going through a lot of folks are in family situations right now, and we have been in one. As a matter of fact, that's the reason we moved back to the Carolinas and be closer to my son and daughter-in-law, and it's been a whole lot of fun. But sometimes you have to just get away from it, and that's what we did. We moved, and I'll have to tell you, I've grown closer to God. And I guess because I can think, because these things happen to you, and Phil and I have been going through the same thing. It's hard to think sometimes. We found we were being forgetful. We were just, and as a matter of fact, I questioned myself. I said, honey, do you think we're getting Alzheimer's? Because we are forgetting some of the simplest things. And Phil said, no, we're not. Because he said, this is what I heard a nurse say once. If you're asking yourself if you have it, you don't have it. so anyway, he said, we just got to get a break.
Well, I think a part of healing is putting up healthy boundaries. And that's just a part of healing, having those healthy boundaries and the motivation to have them and the systems to have them. And sometimes, I guess, boundaries can be moving across state lines, and boundaries can look different in every kind of family and situation. But I do believe having those healthy boundaries, trauma steals from people their no. I wrote in my second book here called Letters to the Weary, a devotion about how they stole my no and left me powerless. So I never felt I could ever say no. And what I mean by that is that I never thought I had a authority to say, this is what I want. This is what is good for me. I just was always in the flow of things. Things was just always chaotic, and it was from one mess to another mess until I learned to put those healthy boundaries up to say, it's okay for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And that's where it started. It didn't start in anger. It didn't start in rejection. It started in faith and it ends in faith. So those boundaries are not because I'm better than anybody. Those boundaries are to keep me safe, to allow me to have my no and my yes.
I totally agree with that. And saying no is important because what would happen? And it's not that I was wishing anything to happen or anything like that. It's family get-togethers. I'm just telling you, there was a period of time I dreaded Christmas because I knew there was going to be an issue, there was going to be a problem, and I would have to watch every single thing that came out of my mouth because I was afraid I was going to upset this person. I could have said the sky is blue, and this person would have been upset. It didn't matter what I said. It's not healthy.
It's not healthy, and it causes angst, and I call it living on the eggshells. You never know what's going to crack or break, and that's what trauma is. It's living on that eggshell, and the victim of trauma is always trying to negotiate through it, navigate through it. What do I say? How do I behave? What do I talk about? What do I talk about? But really, it's not the victim of trauma. It's the abuser. There's nothing there that would ever pacify. There's nothing there that would ever satisfy because their hearts are in a tough place until they can get healing and therapy and peace in their own spirit. So they lash out. And when people are lashing out, you're right. It's okay to say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I need my space. I'm a Christian. I love God. I lift up his name. I pray. The Bible talks about fields. I know the pre-show we were talking about gardening a little bit. And the Bible talks about this principle of fields that after 7 years, you need to give the field a rest. So the nutrients and the iron and all the life comes back to the field. And I think sometimes you can take that principle into other places that sometimes you have to give a season of rest. And if you're in chaos, giving a season of rest is so you can get healthy again. And so it's okay to say no. We know God says no, right? God says yes, no, wait, comes, go. So, it's okay. It's okay to say no.
It's just a matter of we needed rest. I mean, it was hard to deal with, but there's this peace, and I wish it to everybody. You don't even have to be going through things like I'm going through. Sometimes people everything can be going their way, and they just don't feel at peace.
That's right. That's right.
There's something about feeling peace.
The Lord talks about, I love this in the scriptures, how it talks to be still and know that I am God. And that was really difficult for me because I lived constantly in survival mode. So I was always moving, always, not only physically, but emotionally, intellectually. What did I have to create myself to survive? Did I have to be the jock? Did I have to be the comedian? Did I have to be what persona did I have to put on to survive my childhood? So, there was a piece when I learned to be still, and I didn't know how to do it because stillness, I grew up in a house that if you were quiet, you were angry. My wife, she's a quiet person. And I always say, what's going on? You want to talk? Like, oh, I'm fine. I love you. I just need a minute, because I grew up in a house that if you were silent, you were angry. So, but being still, knowing the peace of God, being in the Word of God, knowing that God is in the still small voice who still speaks to us. But oftentimes we are those who've had trauma either due to abuse or all kinds of ways that trauma comes in. We're always in that. It's like always pushing. We're always pushing because we're always trying to get out or get free or get better.
Absolutely. Let's talk to folks who are going to be married. June's coming up. That's the wedding month right there.
It is.
When you marry somebody who's a little different than you are, okay, let's take Phil and me, for instance. You just mentioned the quiet. Okay, well, I was the same way. My parents would not speak. So there would be this dead silence, going through the house. I grew up in that atmosphere. So I was the same way. I thought if Phil was quiet about something, he must be mad. So when we first got married, I would say, is everything okay? And he would say, yeah, why? And I would say, you're not saying anything.
Sure.
And then I expressed to him, I told him why. And he said, well, my family was, just, I liked my quiet time because my family was always not, talking.
Sure.
I said, well, I could always tell when they were mad. My parents were mad at each other. They'd be like quiet. And it would be like you're in a team or something. So let's talk about people with differences. And they are. When my son and daughter-in-law got married. So they went to a great Christian counselor. And so my daughter-in-law actually grew up in an orphanage. And so when the pastor was talking with them, he said, now, Brad, she may have some ways sometimes. She lived a different life than you did growing up, in an orphanage. And, just think about the things that could have happened to her. She may wake up crying sometime. It could be just different things like that. And I just thought that was wonderful that pastor did that. And he put helped to put as much as he possibly could so they could both be aware of each other.
Sure.
And then he told her, he said, something, he grew up an only child. He may be rotten. So you may have looked at, but what do you like to talk with couples about their differences?
Oh, of course. You have to address those things. I mean, opposites attract, and couples have differences and different values and different experiences and different words of conversation. And so I'll never forget, a friend of mine married a young lady from Russia. This was probably in the early 90s, and she escaped Russia. She escaped communism, and this is when the curtain was still up, and East Germany and West Germany was still up. And she came over, and he met her. And the pastor at that ceremony, I'll never forget how he phrased it. He said to them, you started off in two continents, and then you ended up in the same continent. And then from the one continent, you ended up in the same region. And then from the same region, you ended up in the same state. And then from the same state, you ended up in the same town. And then from the same town, you ended up in the same church. And then in the same church, you ended up when you're married, you're going to end up staying in the same home. And then you're going to end up sharing the same bed. And how he took these two from a different continent to now they're going to be sharing the same sleeping arrangement, the same bed, and all that uniqueness and what she brings from having an experience of living behind the Iron Curtain and living through that, that communism, and what he brings of growing up in suburb America, and what he brings, and how those two things blended, and how they had to, and of course, any married couple knows how life blends in values. I always tell couples, where are you going to do holidays? Because somebody says, oh, you're going to do them at my house, right? Well, no, you're going to do them at my house, right? We're going to go to my parents. No, you're going to go to. So how do you do holidays? Is it Thanksgiving one year at your house, and then Christmas the next year with my parents? Especially when you're a young couple, and especially when you have kids, right? Now all the grandparents want the. It's nice the day when everybody comes to your house and you don't have to go anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. I'm still going to houses.
That is. And that's really important. Just a simple little thing like that about Christmas. And so this is the way I handled it. Okay. Because I grew up in the household to where the parents would get into a fight about that.
Sure.
Where we're going for Christmas, blah, 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 blah. So Brad and Larissa came to the house one day, and they as if they were in deep, they wanted to talk to me about something, like it was something big,
Sure.
And so I said, all right, fess up, what is it? And Larissa said, I have, my grandparents are still alive, and my parents, and we lived in Charlotte at the time, they lived in Raleigh. And I said, so what are you talking about? She said, talking about Christmas. And I said, stop. I don't want to see you on Christmas Day. And she looked really funny. And she said, you don't want to see us? And I said, no, I don't want to see you on Christmas Day. Because you got all these other places you got to go to. And I said, why don't we could do like a month before Christmas. We could do a month after. We could do whatever you want. We could do, do it in June, whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to be Christmas Day with me. That's right. I just want to celebrate. That's all I want to do. So I was labeled day one as like the best mother-in-law in the world.
I bet you were.
I said, I'm selfish. I said, I'm selfish mother-in-law. And she said, no, you're not either. You're not making us do it Christmas. And I said, no, I'm selfish. I said, because what I'm thinking is I'm going to get an entire weekend with you.
There you go.
So that's how, sometimes the in-laws have to give just a little bit.
Well, it's true. People have to let that couple build their home. And, in that, they're going to make their ups, their downs, their lefts, their rights. They're going to take some things from each home, and they're going to grow on it. I was in a situation where my mother-in-law is an RN, and she worked every other Christmas. So it was easy for my wife and I to go, okay, the Christmas is it. My mother-in-law didn't have to work. We were there, and then we were at my family for other ones. So But it was, you're right. Those, and you think they're just small things. You think, well, that's not the big thing. But those little things are what marriage is all about. I used to have a professor in college that taught marriage in the family, and he talked about how many people have fights about how they do the toothpaste. Do you squeeze from the bottom, the top? Do you put the cap back on? And he said, buy 2 tubes. So
That
you have
does it. That does it, because I'm one of those. I want it from the bottom and squeeze it up. Phil, he just smashes it.
Oh, see that, Phil?
Oh man! So I just go. You have your toothpaste. I got mine.
There you go. Yeah, I'm that guy. I'm taking the side of the toothbrush and the handle, and I'm pushing out those last. And my wife, she's like, "Why don't you just throw that away?" No, I still got another 2 days. My Aqua Fresh, I still got 2 more days in here. So.
And finances now is a big one. I mean, it's huge. And now Phil and I have both of us are conservative in the way we spend money, so that worked out. But man, I know a lot of families. I know a lot that one is a spend. I mean, they want to spend every dime they've got. And the other one wants to save everything they have.
Sure.
That's got to be tough.
It can. There's a lot of systems when it comes to finances. All I would say is when I'm counseling people, find the system that works for you. If that means that you keep yours and she keeps hers and you're both putting into a pot to take care of the home and the children, if that's the system that works for you, then work it. My system is that I just give it all to my wife. But whatever that is, if it's a joint account, if it's separate accounts, nothing's evil in that. Just whatever system works for you, and then be clear about your expectations and what communication is the biggest thing in any relationship, and especially in marriage. I remember I had a job one time as a teenager. I was working for a supermarket, and I was emptying a pallet onto the shelves, of the different goods, and I had to price it. Remember the old price guns? I had to price it, and I put it up. And the manager came by, and I said, "Yeah, when I'm done, I'm going to throw this pallet in the back." Well, he took the word "throw" literally, and he went, we don't throw pallets; it's unsafe. Now, what I meant is, I'm just going to throw. I'm going to place it. I used the word "throw," but it taught me so much about communication. And sometimes in marriage, you can say one word and somebody goes, okay, this is the way our family meant it, and this is where you mean it. So good communication in any kind of relationship.
Absolutely. And then the culture you're in. You just mentioned the finances of having 2 checkbooks, which I think is a very smart thing. Well, I'm from the South. In Alabama, what that means is that woman's going to spend all the money. That's what it means in the South. And I told Phil, I said, no, look, I know what our culture is in Alabama about, I said, I'm just afraid that if we have the same account, I may spend some money on something and forget to give you the receipt. I mean, I would do something like that. And he said, I don't have a problem with that. But see, I was wanting to talk to him about that before. I was just going to keep my account before we got married, and he was just going to keep his. And I said, well, let's not tell our families, because the culture we're in. They're going to think that we're trying to mess with each other or something. So, but sometimes it is the culture. You can have somebody who's from the North marry somebody from the South. That could be an issue sometimes.
I guess it can. You guys, you all. I mean, y'all fix it. You guys ready to come. I mean, you're going to, we have soda, you have pop. I mean, we drink from a bubbler and you drink from a water fountain. So, there's that can happen. But what you did is not only is it regional, but it also is generational, right? There's generational and there's regional, but you communicated. And you and Phil figured out a way that worked for you, that honored God, that made you feel comfortable. For my wife and I, we figured out a way that, everything I have, I give to her. Somebody said to me years ago, they said, when she won my heart, she won my wallet. So
there you go. But it's all about communication.
That's right.
And I was talking with, I told Phil, I said, because Phil said, you know what, you're just a really good salesperson. I said, oh, don't tell me I'm a salesperson. And because I'm thinking salesperson means I'm selling you something you don't need. I'm saying that's my interpretation of it. from being in the South. And of course, he lived in Texas for a really long time. They had a different idea of what sales. And they said, "Oh, I didn't mean to insult you." And I said, "Oh, I don't know why I'm thinking that." And then we started talking about it. I said, "I don't think of myself as a salesperson at all. I think of myself as somebody who helps somebody find what they need."
That's
And
right. That's right.
And I've got to totally 110% believe in the product. I mean, I gotta believe in it. I couldn't sell something I didn't believe in.
That's true.
I think that total honesty makes you successful, though, because I was back in the day in the 80s. Nobody had cell phones in my region of the world, and so I started working at Cellular One, and it was called Contel Cellular back then. They were easily bought up, Contel. Now they're GTE, Verizon now. And so anyway, I grew up working for them, worked there for several years, and so my boss overheard me give a business card of my competitor to a customer. And so after the customer left, he said, "If you weren't selling so many phones, I'd fire you for that." And I said, "Maybe I'm selling so many phones because I did that." And he said, "Well, what did you just do?" And I said, "Well, we were inferior. Our service wasn't as good as my competitor's service in particular areas." Well, I would always ask questions because I didn't want them coming back saying Donna lied to me that it was going to work in every square inch of the United States, because it didn't. I mean, we had horrible cell phone coverage in the beginning years of cell phones. You probably remember that. I mean, you'd have a lot of terrible areas. So the questions I would ask is, "Where do you work?" And they would tell me. And I would say, "Where do you live?" Because they would want it when they would come home too, to work. And there was this one particular area. It's called Piedmont, Alabama. We had absolutely you use 2 rocks would be better than using my cell phone. It was just that bad. Well, this guy comes in, and he was a big company owner. He wanted to buy a bunch of them. It would have been a nice commission, I'm telling you. And so he's sitting down in my office, and I said, "Where do you live?" Well, I'd always ask how you hear about me. And so he said, "So-and-so company, whatever, recommended me." And he said, "You tell the truth." And I said, "I do." "Now, where do you live?" He said, "I live in Piedmont." And I said, "Where's your business at?" And he said, "It's in Piedmont." And I said, "Oh, man, I have no service." And he said, "Well, every once in a while I come into this area." And I said, "Yeah, but every once in a while it's not going to work, because every time you get that bill in, you're going to be mad at me because I'm not going to have you covered at work in your home." So I reached in my purse and I said, "Ask for this lady's name is Jan." And he said, "You're giving me a competitor's card?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "She'll take care of you." I said, "She's not as good as I am, but she'll take care of you." I said, "She will. She'll take good care of you." He said, "I want you to let me know the minute you get cell phone service in Piedmont." And I said, "Well, now you can't break your contract. There's a $200 penalty per phone if you break your contract." And so I told him all those things up front. So then we get, Phil and I were driving around. We heard the rumor that we had cell phone service in Piedmont. So Phil and I drove to Piedmont. Sure enough, we had cell phone service. I called him and I said, "Guess where I'm at?" And "I hope you're in Piedmont." I said, "I'm in Piedmont." He canceled his phones, even paying a $200 fee per line. And there was a bunch of lines. And so he came with me because I was so brutally honest with him.
That's because you weren't just making a deal. You weren't just you cared about a client. You cared about a person. You saw the long game, if you would. And that's integrity. That's
why I was insulted when Phil called me a salesperson.
Sure.
Because I was working with salespeople who'd sell it and lie at their teeth, telling people, yeah, every square inch of the United States is covered. No, it wasn't.
Now, when you speak about cell phones back in the day, I was young, and my mom, she worked for Motorola. There was
I sold them flip phones.
Yeah. Well, this we're going way back. So she worked for Motorola, so she could get a special deal as an employee of Motorola, and we had the car for the bag. The bag. I don't know if you remember that. There was a bag. It was like a soft bag, and you'd walk in and you'd pick it up, and my mom had that for a short time, only because they basically gave it to their employees for some reduced rate because they wanted people to have it, and they wanted the blue collar guy to have as much as the white collar guy. So they offered it to their employees really, really cost effective. So my mom had it for a short time. So we would go outside the house just to call from the car inside the house. Just say, I'm in the car. I'm in the car.
Just where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm in the car. That's it.
But
so
you know
we're
something?
going.
Those were the best phones. They were 3 watt. They were 3 watts. Your handhelds are only 0.6 of a watt. So
Wow.
when you got into those bad service areas, you had much better coverage with those. They just didn't look as cool, but
They
but
did it.
but
They
you
did
had
it.
much better phone service.
But I remember I was young, so I didn't carry it. But my mom had it for a short time because Motorola basically made sure all their employees could get it. So
But see,
yeah, I
you got
remember.
the point about like just a word sometimes can insult somebody just from an experience they had, from something else. So and
You're
and and,
right.
and it really does. I remember when we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, we called in the grocery store, we would say buggies. And so I remember walking into the grocery store one day, and I said, "So where are the buggies? Do you have other buggies?" I said buggies, and she goes, "Buggy," and she said, "Oh, cart." So you guys call them carts, whereas in Alabama we call them buggies.
Well, we have a word that we put in front of everything. It's a word we call wicked. It's a very colloquial New England, Massachusetts word. Wicked awesome, wicked good, wicked. So so one day I was preaching in Ohio, and I said after the service they were going to do a cookout, and from the platform I said we're going to have a wicked good cookout, meaning it's going to be exciting and fun. And I remember this little old saint. She put out her, "Come here, preacher." I went down, the blue hair, the 5'1", and she looked at me and she said, "Why are you wishing wickedness upon our cookout today?" And that's because she interpreted wicked as being evil, where I didn't never interpret it that way. I interpreted it as being exciting, fun, because that's an adjective that we use here to explain. We never use it by itself. People who use it by itself are people from outside the region. You wouldn't just say wicked. You'd say wicked good, wicked fun, wicked awesome, wicked. It's just an adjective before the verb. So but it's funny how different people. And now I have a word that I use, and I remember I was pastoring again in Ohio, and I said to the youth pastor, we were out in the church van, and I was checking all the lights, and I said to her, "Is the blinker working?"
Oh, I know what the blinker means.
But she said, "Pastor, what are you?" I said, "No, I just turned on the left blinker." And she came around the corner again and said, "Pastor, I don't know." I said, "No, no, no, let's go back." And she said, directional. And in the traffic circles, we call those rotaries. We call them rotaries. Yeah, we don't call them traffic circles.
I would feel like I'm in another country in your region.
Yeah, I just so hey, I went into the rotary. Then I grew up calling them rotaries, and then somebody said, "Oh, you go to the traffic circle." I said, "Where's the traffic circle?" So it's just funny how words are and how we are related to those words. Like you said, you heard salesman in a negative term. Like you heard, "Oh, that's the sleazy person, the cheat, the used car salesman that's got bubble gum and whack, that just wants to sell you." But your husband heard it as a career, somebody who's a salesman who can offer a service. So when he called you a salesman, you're like, "Wait a second," because of the connotation that you had with that word. And sometimes in scriptures, people have that same feeling. We say God loves you, and they go, "Well, if God loved me, then why did this bad thing happen?" Because they have a connotation with the word. So.
Oh, absolutely. Another one I thought was funny, J.D. Vance, our VP, President of the United States. And so I saw the movie about him when he was growing up. I thought it was funny. So he marries this really beautiful lady. She's from India, or she's in India. And so they were making pancakes. And he looked at her and he said, "Did you find the syrup?" He called it syrup. And she said, "What's syrup?" Syrup. So I said, "Wow, he must have been from Alabama," because we would say syrup. So anyway.
I had a friend of mine who years ago, about 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago, got stranded in the deep South. Now, he's from New York, and it was him and his kids and his wife, and the car broke down. They were just stressed out. The kids were young, and they decided, "Hey, let's go get something to eat. Let's just and they walked into a McDonald's. And there at the McDonald's, she said, "I'll have the pancake meal." the person behind the counter looked at her like she had 3 heads. Pancake meal? What's a pancake? And she said, "You mean the flapjacks? You mean the flapjacks pancake? That's what I want. I've been straight." That's it.
So imagine what it would be like. 2 people getting married, one's from the north, one's from the south, or maybe from another country. And they get married. I mean, to me, it would be a lot of fun. I mean, it would be like, I say potato, you say potato. I mean, it was just so let's just make the whole thing work. Let's go into a commercial break, and we'll be right back in just a minute. Man, time flies. We'll be right back.
Twin City Used Car Sales has been serving drivers in the Northeast Alabama area for years with a quality selection of late model used cars, SUVs, and pickup trucks. On top of our extensive selection and competitive prices, we offer professional auto financing services for used car buyers of all credit levels. Whether you've just begun your search or you're ready to secure your next vehicle, at Twin City Used Car Sales, you will drive away with the vehicle of your dreams. The sales and finance staff at Twin City Used Car Sales looks forward to serving you, and you can apply for financing online before your visit to our used dealership in Gadsden, Alabama. Check us out on the web at twincityusedcars.com or go by our location at 901 First Avenue, Gadsden, Alabama. We sincerely look forward to serving you. At Lamone's Mexican Restaurant, located in Henniger, Alabama, and voted Best Mexican Restaurant of the Cobb County, Alabama 2020, we're here to serve you with authentic Mexican cuisine. Order easily online by going to lamonsmex.com or call 256-657-3999 to place your order. We're open Sunday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Friday and Saturday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Whether you're celebrating a cozy date night for 2 or a celebration for a crowd, at Lamone's you'll love our atmosphere and friendly servers. Thank you for dining with Lamone's Mexican Restaurant.
Are you ready?
We all wonder what tomorrow will bring, but the future lays itself at the feet of the prepared and surrenders to the will of the persistent. It's not easy, but today shapes you so you can shape tomorrow. With Northeast Alabama Community College, when the future asks if you're ready, you can answer
yes.
Begin your future at Northeast Alabama Community College.
At Liberty Bank, we're all about community. Whether it's to help with a charity fundraiser or help families in need, toys at Christmas, or a local football team, we're here for you. You see, we realize the importance of family. Sometimes it's to build a new home or necessary home repairs. We're here for you. If you like the feel of a small town bank with all the conveniences of a big city bank, we're here to serve you. You will find us at any of our convenient locations in DeKalb, Marshall, Etowah, and Blount counties in North Alabama. You can call and speak with any of our friendly staff at 256-659-2175 or check us out on the web at libertybankal.com. And thank you for your support of our community. Member FDIC Equal Housing Lender.
Good afternoon. We're back. My name is Donna, and I'm your host of Donna's Edge Talk Show, where truth matters. Thank you so much for watching every day, Monday through Friday, beginning at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. on the Eastern Time Zones. I get to ride home with you in the afternoon. You can find us on television. You can find us on Abundant Television, syndicated, found on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. Don't forget the podcast on thenewscasters.com. Continue watching us on Facebook, sharing on any social media site you would like. We definitely appreciate you doing that. And continue sending emails. They make my day. Donna@donnasedge.com. Donna@donnasedge.com. I have one of my favorite guests with me right now. And this is Pastor Mark Sowersby. And I mean, we have a show before the show and at the break show. I mean, we just have a show just all the time, don't we, Mark?
We do. You're too kind. And thank you so much, Donna, for always giving me this platform to share, express, talk, enjoy our company, but ultimately lift up the name of the Lord. And I appreciate that so much.
Well, we're here to get along with each other as much as we possibly can, but I'm going to have to tell you this. Okay, so sometimes there can be confusion among generations.
That's right.
Back in my day, they called it the generation gap. And so, I mean, things were taken the wrong way sometimes based on our differences in the way we saw the world. Now, I'll have to tell you, I've got an old soul, so I didn't have that many problems, that many issues. So as far as myself is concerned, but sometimes that happens. If you marry somebody, say, much older than you are, or, as we're talking about marriages, June is coming up, let's all get along with each other, that kind of thing. Now, what are you seeing? What kinds of questions when you're counseling a young couple? What kind of questions do they ask you about relationships now?
Well, they're always, they're always in love, and love cures everything. And they're the only two that's ever been this much in love ever is when I meet these couples. But I tell them that to have good communication. And I also let them know that finances split up more marriages than anything else, bigger than infidelity, bigger than anything else, because of expectations and what one expects and the roles in the marriage. Does one come in with traditional roles, or does one come in and say, I'm not doing the laundry, you do your own, so what are the roles? What are not the roles? So those are some of the big questions. After you get them down from this, we're going to be married and walk on water, and we hear angels' wings every day. And all we need is love, as the song says. And you bring them down and say, well, that's great, and you got to have that, and you guys should love each other at 100% all the time, but there's going to be real life, and what does that look like?
And then sometimes when the kids come along, like it, and let me ask you this: is there a difference between? Because I was the firstborn, Phil was the middle child. Okay, I can probably be a little bossy sometimes because I my brother and sister. So can there be issues coming out of when you were born, like the line you were born?
Well, my wife would tell you I'm the baby. So my wife would tell you I'm spoiled. Now she's the oldest. So she would say she's the oldest of five. I'm sorry, the oldest of five. And she would definitely say there is some birth order habits. She definitely would say that. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I definitely think there are too. Now, Phil being in the middle is not so hard to deal with. So, I mean, because, he had to kind of give and take. He had older siblings and then a younger sibling. So he was right smack down in the middle of the kids, the middle child.
Well, I'm so much younger than my siblings. I'm 10 years younger than my brother, and I'm 7 years younger than my sister. So there's a large gap. Yeah. So my wife says I was raised as a baby only, in the sense that my brother and sisters kind of left the house. They were, teenagers, and I was an infant and a child. So my wife says, I wrestle with both of those attitudes of baby getting whatever I want, and only not have to share with anybody. So she'll tell you that all the time about me. But yeah, I think that those birth orders are definitely, because it's a perspective, right? It's a perspective. And, what's the perspective of, as parents, that first child, you're doing everything, to make your parents proud, everything to keep the baby safe. And, I remember when we had our first child, my wife only wanted a certain kind of diaper that made, had this kind of oil on it and that kind of oil. And by the time our fourth child came down, what's on sale at Walmart? That, it does the same thing. It's cleaning up the same. So, but the first one had to have, shave oil and this kind of, because and then, perspectives change. You go, you know what? It's all cleaning up the same mess. So of course things change, and that birth order gives you perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had. I was a member of the Rotary Club in Anniston, Alabama, morning Rotary, and it was always a whole lot of fun. So I would invite speakers to come and talk to us while we were having breakfast. So this lady, I mean, she is awesome. Her name was Mrs. Couch, and she and her husband owned Couch's Jewelers. And they started it back in the 20s and the 30s. And I mean, they just went on, and the kids now own it, but they raised their kids the right way. and to run the business like they did. Because a lot of times parents put all this blood, sweat, and tears into owning a business, doing without, and what have you, and the kids mess it up. But her kids kept it going the right way. And she was speaking, and I was real good friends with her son, Fred. And Fred said, I'm dreading this. I don't know what's going to come out of her mouth. And I said, oh, she'll do great. So she gets up there and she said, you know something? When Fred was born, he was the last one. But I got to tell you, when the first one was born, she said, we made sure that the water was the right temperature, mentioned the diapers, the baby food had to be just right and all
That's
this.
right.
Said, but they had 5 kids. By the time Fred came along, they didn't care anymore. She said, we didn't even heat the milk. We just throw it in his mouth and let him go for it.
That's it.
You change those too.
Yeah, you mentioned you had a friend who owned a business and it was a family business. I too have a friend who owns a trucking business, and it's a hard labor job. It works around stone, and it's a very difficult job. And he said that when the kids, because him and his brothers own it, they inherited it from their dad, and when the kids want to come to work, either his kids or his nephews, they have to start at the bottom ring. They have to start at the lowest part to come into the family business. And what happens if you don't go to college, you got to work in the family business. So the bottom of the ring, and anybody that knows trucking would know that you have to take a hose and clean off those trucks, especially when they move gravel and dirt and sand. No matter what season it is, in the middle of winter or in the middle of summer, you have to clean off those trucks because you'll get fined and ticketed if they leave the yard messy. So they all start cleaning off the trucks. And he said, if they go to college, they don't have to do it. And he said, we have one of the most highly educated kids. They came in, they cleaned off I said, I'm going back to school. I'm gonna stay here and get my doctorate in something because I don't want to go back and clean off that truck in December. So he said, all the grandkids or nieces and nephews all have these educations because they didn't want to stand in the middle of December washing off trucks.
Yeah, that'd be a good way to get you to go to college.
That's what he said. Yeah.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the parents. And you're basically the way I wish I had looked at it. Now, I run a fantastic son despite all of my craziness. So he turned out great. But sometimes you'll see people get married and maybe the parents gave little Johnny and little Susie everything they ever wanted. And they didn't have to work for anything. Then these same kids get married and it's destruction. I mean, because they're used to being a princess, they're used to being a prince, and you're gonna love your kids as much as you can. I'm telling you, I still tell my son I love him every day, and he's like almost 50 years old. But I'm just saying, I mean, you have to do that. But what's the difference in just giving the kids every single thing they want? They don't have to work for anything. And I'm not talking about just marriage. I'm talking about on the job when they grow up later as well.
Well, I think, when I grew up, I was Generation X, and we'd go out, didn't have to come back until the lights came on. And what we did as children, I call it sandbox politics. Your mom was always there for you. Your dad was there for you. Your loved ones were there for you. Excuse me. But sandbox politics is when you take that toy from the kid who had it, he's going to want it back, right? And this is how we learned how to have social behavior. If you take something as mine, I'm going to whop you. That's what the 2-year-old does, the 1-year-old does. And of course, parents intervene and teach, and no, don't do that. But this is sandbox politics, where we learn to interact, where we learn to respect, where we learn to kind of deal with each other. Now that grows and matures, that not everything I see can be mine. Now, when you don't have that kind of interaction, when we're behind a screen all day, when we're not out of our house, when everything's regimented, and of course we want to keep our kids safe, and we don't let them go out anymore by themselves around the neighborhood because we don't know who lives in the neighborhood, and we want to keep them safe. But sometimes without that sandbox politics, where everything's been handed to us on a silver platter or just handed to us, that in life, when we don't get it handed to us, we go, why? What happened? What happened? And that can cause lots of issues and angst for people.
Oh, yeah. And they make terrible employees. But it can be stopped. It really can, because I know of another situation with a couple of friends of mine. She was raised as a princess. I'm just telling you, she was. And so she marries this guy, and he goes, no, you're not a princess. You're the queen of my household, but you're not a princess. And there are things that you have to do too. And somehow that worked out. But now they got into a good church.
Amen.
And she had good mentors from some of the women who went to that church too.
Amen. Amen. One time I wrote a colleague of mine, I wrote him, and in my letter, we were discussing some things that were taking place. And I said, well, that's great. Let's make sure we don't have a conflict. And I meant in schedule. Let's make sure we don't have a conflict, that what you have planned and I have planned and this other thing we're planning to do together doesn't have any, a conflict, that we can still find time. Well, I didn't hear back from them. I didn't hear back. I made sure the email went through. I read it again. I had my wife read it. Did I say something? And about sometimes later, he wrote me back and he said, that word conflict you put in the email was a trigger word for me. And I thought to myself, well, I wasn't saying we have a conflict. I was just saying, let's make sure our schedule doesn't conflict, that when you do A and I do B, we still have time to do C. But it was really, I never forgot that, because I thought, wow, I wasn't saying we have a problem or an issue or a conflict. And it was just really there was years between us. We were of different generations. And that really taught me that, on how to, when you're speaking, Paul said, I become all things to all men, that I may win some to the Lord. Paul went to Mars Hill, and he said, I serve the unknown God. And he always found ways to connect faith to the people he was talking to. And I think that's important, that even though we're having a lot of fun talking about the nuances and the differences of generational comments and regional comments, the gospel must be preached so people could hear. So, when I was in Central America, I couldn't say your sins as white as snow, because a lot of them was like, what's snow? So I remember the missionary taking a coconut and going, your sins is as white as the inside of a coconut. They can relate to that. So, I think it's really important that, as again, communication, and what do I want to communicate? About the love of God. And if that means I got to say coconut or snow, or I get to say wicked awesome or blinker, or instead of saying soda, I say pop. Instead of saying you guys, I say you all. Instead of saying auntie, I say auntie. Whatever it takes, that I may communicate the love and the grace of Jesus Christ.
Well, let me ask you another question. This also pertains to, differences with people as well. And so this comes from maybe this is a couple. So maybe one of them is a believer and one is not a believer.
Sure.
What are your suggestions for that?
Well, I would hope before you get there, you want to not be unequally yoked. And that doesn't mean that every day is perfect and you're tiptoeing through the tulips. My wife and I both love Jesus Christ with all our hearts. We both feel a call to ministry. But we're in the same lane, but boy, we could shift in that lane. She can hang out on one. So we're in the same lane and we're 99% on the same time. But those little differences can become loud and need communication. But I would not know what it's like to share a life with somebody who didn't share the same faith. I would imagine that would be a very heavy thing, because you would say, hey, I want to go to church. This is important to me. This is a value to me. And if the other spouse doesn't share that value or even dismisses that value, how difficult that can be. So if I'm blessed enough to meet a couple at the beginning, I always bring that up to say, are you guys, again, I'm not talking about being perfect or having every answer or, you both have to do everything the same way all the time. But do you both share a faith in Jesus Christ? Do you both share a hope in the Lord together? And if you do, then I think that's a blessing.
Well, what about the one couple that, and I'll use one of my aunts and uncles, uncle. So as one of my aunts, and she was just a phenomenal lady, but she was always going to change him. He was a womanizer and he was an alcoholic. And she never, on his deathbed, he did change, but it was on his deathbed. But they went through just decades of marriage where she would get a call and she would have to go to some woman's house and take him back home. Wow. And I remember thinking, man, I'd never marry anybody like that, And it was actually my uncle. I mean, she married him.
Sure.
But that's always took up for her on that. But she would always say, I might be the reason he changes.
Wow. Yeah, she wanted her life to be a witness. I heard it said one time that when a man and woman gets married, the woman says, "I know he will change." And when the man gets married, he says, "I hope she never changes." I heard that one time in kind of a poetic way. We always change. And you're right. When one spouse is not saved, it's important that the other spouse prays for them and is a light for them and shares the gospel for them, and is that person. Knowing how to do that with wisdom, and you don't want to be a nag, you don't want to be a Bible thumper, but you want to pray them into the kingdom, because no arguments ever won somebody to God. No one's ever lost an argument and said, "You know what? I think that love, understanding, grace, and truth brings people to God through the Holy Spirit and the Word."
Well, a lot of people don't even get into discussions because it's, especially for a woman. Now, a man, I'm just going to have to tell you this, a man can say something and it doesn't sound like he's nagging, or he doesn't think it is. But now a woman can, and it can be like, she just nags all the time. So as women have to work through that stereotype.
My wife tells me I can nag. She said. So, yeah, I think it's just communication. How do we present? When do we present? Where do we talk? I'll tell you, sometimes I'll be in the middle of the football game and it'll be 4th and 10, and my quarterback will throw the ball and my receiver's about ready to catch it. And one of my kids say, "Dad, I need to talk to you."
Always.
Yeah. So, there's those moments where where's the best time to talk? Where's the best time to communicate? We had a married couple in our church in New York, and I'll tell you what she said. If we could talk a little grown up, she said the best time is to talk after the mood is over, when you're sitting in bliss, and after you've become one. Yeah. If the guy's not, if no one's falling asleep, let's talk. She said, "I knew I had all of his attention right then."
Well, I grew up in a household with a lot of tension, So I remember it was right before Phil and I got married. My car was in the shop. It was just getting oil changed or something. I forgot what it was. So Phil said, we'll just, you can drive my car, Wouldn't you know, I had a wreck.
Oh man, he loves you.
Yeah, it was the traffic, and somebody hit me, which meant we were still. So somebody hit me, which meant I hit the other person. So I was dreading telling Phil. I was just imagining it would be like my parents. He'd be just like a dog fight or something like that. And Brad was along, and so I said, "Now, Brad, let me tell Phil, okay? Let me be the one tell him. Don't go jumping in there telling that we had a wreck, okay?" And then nobody was hurt or anything like that. But anyway, I was dreading this. It was like, oh my God, we're going to wind up breaking up. The wedding's going to. So I imagined in my mind everything was going to happen. The wedding's going to be called off and all this kind of stuff. We were just a couple of weeks into the wedding, and so I get there, and Brad just, "Hey, guess what? Mom wrecked your car." It was like first words out of Brad's mouth, And I looked at Phil like, oh my God, he's going to break up with me. He's going to think I'm a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. Well, the first words out of his mouth was not about the car. He wanted to know if I was okay.
Oh, of course.
I said, "I'm shook up."
Okay.
I said, "It hurt my feelings more than it hurt me." Like that. Well, he said, "I've got insurance. It's no problem." He didn't yell at me. He didn't scream. He didn't carry on at me. He didn't do any of that stuff, which that's not how I grew up.
Sure.
I was in a house like that.
Sure.
And it's kind of different for somebody when you expect somebody's going to erupt because that happened in your family.
Sure.
Then that person you marry doesn't do it. You're almost expecting a fight.
You are.
Expecting like.
What you said there is that you imagined this scene where he was going to belittle you and talk down to you and how dare you, and I can't believe, and that's because you built that up because of the perspective you had. And I think sometimes that's what trauma does. The lie of trauma in any of us, we build up these scenarios where we go, well, if I tell, they'll get mad at me. If I can't do it, they'll hate me. If I'm bad at it, they'll reject me. And that's a lie of the enemy. And in that lie, it isolates us. Trauma always isolates us from community, from family, from health, from security, from peace. It always isolates us from many things. So when I write in my books about that, about how the fear of, well, they won't care, they won't love, this straw man that I built up in my head that was loud, going, they'll always hate me, I'll always be bad, I'll never be good enough, I'll always be fat, stupid, dumb. But when I started to open up the door and trust people, and it was hard. I started to trust my wife, and when I put my big mouth when I put my big foot in my mouth, she didn't reject me. She didn't rebuke me. She didn't, just like Phil didn't reject you. And I think that's when you grow up in that trauma, you build those straw men, and those straw men isolate us. I can't tell. I'll lie. I'll cheat. But that's just a part of the part of the hurt, part of the healing process. But when God's word is louder, when his word says, greater is me who's in you, when his word says, I've forgiven you, and it's from the east, as far as the east is from the west, when he says he's the lifter of the head and the lover of the soul, these are the words of peace that we receive and walk in.
Well, you do grow out of it with time. I mean, I still have my moments, but not near like it used to be. But sometimes, and that's what I've often wondered about worry. I thought, is it a sin to worry? I mean, is it? Because, I mean, I'm just telling you, the things that I've had in my head that might happen, none of it ever has. it just happens. But part of it, maybe it was just the way the household I was in.
I think so. I don't know if it's a sin. It's definitely human. Christ tells us not to worry. He tells us to consider the birds of the fields, right? How much does he do for them? How much more will he do for us? Do not worry where you'll go. But I don't know if it's a sin. I don't think he's going to say, oh, you. But I think it's a part of that fallen nature, if you would, or the trauma, if you would, and that says, I have to be. When you learn that you don't have to, I think sometimes out of trauma, we're always trying to be something. I have to be good enough. I have to be smart enough. I have to be thin enough. I have to be rich enough. And we realize that God's not calling us to be something. He's calling us to serve, to serve him. He's calling us to transform us, not to be something in the sense of this facade that we put on. If I'm, my happiness is just around the next corner, my next paycheck, my next car, my next drink, my next, that's when I'll find the happiness. But the happiness we have is in Christ. And no longer that I'm a new creation, that I put, as Ephesians tells us, I put on the helmet of salvation. And in that place, I'm okay. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't never want to change or never want to grow or never want to be better. And of course, I want to lose weight, get healthy and all. But at the same time, I don't hate myself anymore because God loves me so much. And one of the greatest commandments is what? To love thy neighbor as yourself. And I could love myself because of my trauma. So I was loving people like I love myself, which was rejection and pain. But when Christ started to love me, then my heart was changed. And I started to love God, and God helped me start to love others.
There you go. We got to go. It's less than a minute. How can folks find out more about you?
Hey, you can check me out at our website, forgivingthenightmare.com. Check out our 2 books, Forgiving the Nightmare, Letters to the Weary. You can connect with me there, Mark at forgivingthenightmare.com, but forgivingthenightmare.com.
There you go. Mark, thank you again so much for being with us on the show. And thank you guys so much for watching. You're the reason we do this. Continue sending emails, Donna at donnasedge.com. See you next time.